It was many years before time finally erased a little of that nightmare and let me sleep. Sophia German was just 12 when she watched Cheyenne warriors murder and scalp her mother, brother, and 2 sisters before being dragged onto horseback. For 6 brutal months, she lived in constant terror of death, weapons aimed at her multiple times, starvation gnawing at her belly, and bitter cold seeping through tattered clothes. One of America's most harrowing captivity stories began just 20 miles from safety on September 11, 1874. Spring 1874 marked a critical juncture in American frontier relations. Throughout the Midwest, Native American tribes harbored deep resentments over a cascade of broken treaties, land encroachment, and the systematic destruction of their traditional way of life. The U.S. government's policy of confining tribes to reservations had intensified tensions across the region, creating a volatile atmosphere that would soon erupt into violence. In response to growing frustrations, tribal leaders from 4 powerful nations, the Kiowa, Comanche, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, convened a significant council at Medicine Lodge Creek near Wichita, Kansas. At this gathering, grievances were aired, magnified through communal storytelling, and transformed into calls for resistance. Speeches recounted violations of the 1867 Medicine Lodge Treaty, which had already been undermined by white settlement and buffalo hunting on promised native lands. The council's rhetoric intensified tribal anger, with younger warriors increasingly advocating for direct action against white settlers. Meanwhile, completely unaware of these dangerous developments, the German family prepared for their westward journey. The family of 9 had left their original home in Georgia, making their way to Elgin, Kansas, before embarking on the final leg of their migration toward Colorado in spring 1874. Their destination lay near Fort Wallace, a military outpost established in 1865 along the Smoky Hill Trail that served as a crucial defensive point for settlers and travelers in western Kansas. The German family represented a typical American settler household of the era. Father and mother German led their 7 children: Stephen, 19, Rebecca, 20, Catherine, 17, Joanna, 14, Sophia, 12, Julia, 7, and Nancy Adelaide, 5. They traveled in a canvas-covered wagon pulled by oxen, carrying their essential possessions and hopes for a new beginning near the Colorado border. Father never spoke about any dangers, Sophia later recalled. With his family along, he kept his worries to himself. We children thought it was an adventure, counting wildlife and racing alongside the wagon when we grew restless. Their journey followed established protocols for frontier travel. The mother and older daughters managed the oxen and wagon, while the younger children rode alongside, tasked with preventing their livestock from straying. The father and Stephen maintained vigilant positions at the front or flanks, rifles ready for hunting or defense. Each night, they constructed makeshift barricades around their camp and established rotation schedules for night watch, common practice for families traveling through potentially dangerous territory. The German family's route traced the Smoky Hill River Valley, following a wide trail marked by deep ruts from countless wagons that had traveled before them. This established pathway connected eastern Kansas to Denver, serving as a major migration and commerce route since the 1850s. Along this corridor, they encountered various travelers: freight haulers transporting goods to western settlements, buffalo hunters returning from expeditions, and occasional soldiers patrolling from nearby forts. These encounters provided the Germans with fragments of information about Native American activities in the region. Travelers spoke of increased Indian movements and isolated incidents, but nothing specific enough to alarm the family or alter their plans. For children like Sophia, these stories represented abstract dangers rather than imminent threats to their safety. The social context of 1874 placed families like the Germans in a precarious position. Western settlement had accelerated following the Civil War, with approximately 300,000 migrants traveling westward between 1870 to 1870. This massive population movement intensified competition for land and resources, further straining relations with native tribes. Neither the U.S. government nor frontier families fully appreciated the depth of native grievances or recognized the spark needed to ignite large-scale violence. By September 10, 1874, the German family had nearly completed their long journey. They established what they expected to be their final camp that evening, just 20 miles from Fort Wallace, their intended destination and sanctuary. The proximity to the fort fostered a sense of security and accomplishment among family members. They prepared for an early morning departure, planning to reach the fort the next day and conclude their exhausting trek across the plains. "We went to sleep feeling safe that night," Sophia later wrote in her account. "Fort Wallace was so close. Father said we'd be there before noon tomorrow, and then all the hard traveling would be over. None of us imagined it would be our last night together as a family." The Germans' optimism reflected their ignorance of immediate dangers. Unknown to them, Cheyenne scouts had observed their camp, noting its vulnerable position and the family's routine. The warriors watched silently throughout the night, planning their approach for morning. This surveillance represented standard tactics for Plains tribal warfare: patient observation followed by swift, overwhelming attack. As the family slept on September 10th, they stood at the intersection of two colliding worlds: American westward expansion and native resistance to territorial encroachment. The Germans, like many settler families, became unwitting participants in a broader conflict over land, sovereignty, and survival. Their personal tragedy would soon exemplify the brutal realities of frontier violence that characterized this contentious period in American history. The German family rose early on September 11th, eager to complete the final stretch of their journey. With Fort Wallace just 20 miles away, they packed their belongings efficiently and prepared for departure. The proximity to the fort gave them confidence that they had successfully traversed the dangerous portions of their route and now stood under the protective umbrella of the U.S. military outpost. "We set out happy in the belief that we had passed the danger zone," Sophia recalled years later. "We thought we were already under the protection of Fort Wallace. None of us saw any reason to worry." This sense of security proved catastrophically misplaced. The German family, like many settlers of the period, misunderstood the true range and mobility of Native American warriors. Fort Wallace's influence extended only as far as its patrols traveled, leaving vast stretches of territory vulnerable to attack despite their nominal inclusion in protected zones. Around 7 o'clock a.m., as the family traveled along the Smoky Hill River Valley, the attack came with shocking suddenness. A band of approximately 20 Cheyenne warriors appeared on the horizon, descending upon the valley with strategic precision. Their emergence seemed supernatural to the children, who had never witnessed the advanced concealment techniques employed by Plains warriors. Suddenly, as if growing out of the ground, a band of Cheyenne swooped down the valley of the Smoky Hill, Sophia recounted. "We children counted them, excited before we realized the danger. I remember thinking how magnificent they looked on their horses, not understanding what their arrival meant for us." The warriors separated into tactical formations, with several riders immediately targeting Stephen, who rode ahead of the main wagon. The 19-year-old had no chance to defend himself or alert his family. The Cheyenne warriors, expert horsemen trained from childhood in mounted combat, overtook him within seconds. Stephen was shot multiple times before he could comprehend the nature of the threat. Stephen, who had been riding some distance ahead, was chased and shot down before he could know what was happening to us, Sophia later wrote. "I heard the shots and saw him fall. It happened so fast I couldn't even scream." The main body of warriors then descended upon the wagon. The German father attempted to retrieve his rifle, but was quickly overwhelmed and killed. The Mober's death followed moments later, accompanied by the gruesome practice of scalping, a ritual act of warfare with deep cultural significance among many Plains tribes, though one that inspired particular terror among white settlers. For Sophia, her mother's scalping represented an especially traumatic detail. "Mother was killed too, and because of her long tresses that I had loved to brush 100 strokes, was scalped," she recalled. "The sound, I still hear the sound sometimes, even now. I used to brush her hair every night and count each stroke. They took that from her, from me." The scene devolved into chaos as the 6 German sisters scattered in panic. Their desperate flight triggered a significant disagreement among the Cheyenne warriors about their fate. This dispute revealed divisions within native raid parties that often went unrecorded in official military accounts. Some warriors advocated killing all the children, while others argued for taking them captive, either for adoption into the tribe or for potential exchange with U.S. authorities. I don't remember much about what we did except run together while the Braves got together too, plainly arguing about something, Sophia noted. Their voices grew louder, angrier. We huddled together, holding hands. Catherine told us to pray, but I couldn't remember any prayers. All I could think was, "Please don't hurt us," over and over. This internal dispute among the warriors escalated into violence that claimed 2 more lives. Rebecca and Joanna, the oldest and third oldest sisters respectively, were caught, killed, and scalped as the argument reached its peak. Whether their deaths represented a compromise among the disagreeing warriors or occurred in the heat of the moment remains unclear from Sophia's account. The parleys grew into a dispute, and finally they came to where Brave was herding us together, Sophia recounted. They killed 2 of us girls, leaving Rebecca and Joanna there on the prairie, bloody and scalped. I looked back as they dragged us away. They looked so small from a distance, like dolls someone had thrown away. The 4 surviving sisters, Catherine, 17, Sophia, 12, Julia, 7, and Nancy Adelaide, 5, were forcibly placed on horses behind warriors. The girls, in shock and terror, clung desperately to their captors to avoid falling as the party departed at high speed. The warriors employed whips to urge their mounts to greater speed, aware that U.S. military patrols might respond once news of the attack reached Fort Wallace. They kept hurrying away with us hanging on to keep from falling off in the hard run, Sophia remembered. My arms ached from holding on so tight. Nancy Adelaide kept crying for Mother. I wanted to tell her to be quiet, afraid they would hurt her if she didn't stop, but I couldn't find my voice. The Cheyenne raiders headed southwest toward Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, traveling across open prairie to avoid established trails where they might encounter military patrols. This direction was significant. The movement toward designated Indian Territory reflected the warriors' understanding of geographical boundaries and their strategy to reach areas where tribal authority still held some sway. The September 11th attack on the German family exemplified patterns of frontier violence that characterized the region during this period. Between 1868 and 1875, similar raids claimed the lives of approximately 300 settlers in Kansas alone. These attacks reflected both tribal resistance to encroachment and the particular brutality of a cultural conflict where neither side fully comprehended the other's motivations or values. For the 4 surviving German sisters, the attack marked just the beginning of their ordeal. As they were carried away from the bodies of their family members, they entered a 6-month captivity that would test their resilience and forever alter their lives. I still remember looking back over my shoulder to where the others were scattered upon the prairie, Sophia wrote decades later, the memory still vivid. The last thing I saw was Mother's blue dress, now stained dark red, getting smaller and smaller as we rode away. I knew then I would never be the same person again. For the first 2 weeks after their capture, the 4 German sisters, Catherine, 17, Sophia, 12, Julia, 7, and Nancy Adelaide, 5, remained together in the Cheyenne camp. This initial period of captivity established patterns that would characterize their entire ordeal: constant fear, physical discomfort, and the struggle to understand a culture fundamentally different from their own. The Cheyenne band that had captured them traveled southwest into what was then designated as Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, an area officially set aside for Native American tribes through treaties that were frequently violated by white settlers. The warriors maintained vigilant security, aware that military pursuit was likely once the attack on the German family was discovered. We stayed huddled together all the time, Sophia later recalled. Catherine would hold the little ones at night when they cried. She told us to be brave, but I could feel her trembling too. We never knew what would happen from one hour to the next. The captive girls found themselves in a complex social environment. Cheyenne camps operated according to strict hierarchies and cultural protocols unintelligible to outside observers. Adult women controlled domestic affairs while warriors managed external relations and defense. The German sisters occupied an ambiguous position, neither fully accepted members of the community nor treated as enemies. Instead, they existed in an intermediate state as potential adoptees or valuable bargaining assets. Food during this period consisted primarily of dried meat, wild plants, and occasionally fresh game. The girls' unfamiliarity with Native American cuisine added another layer of hardship to their captivity. Language barriers prevented even basic communication, leaving the sisters isolated within their shared experience of trauma. The food was strange, and there was never enough, Sophia wrote. Nancy Adelaide wouldn't eat for days until hunger finally made her try the jerky they gave us. I pretended it was just tough beef from home. Sometimes we'd get so hungry, we'd eat things we never would have touched before. Approximately 2 weeks into their captivity, a crucial moment altered their situation dramatically. The Cheyenne detected signs of military pursuit, likely a cavalry detachment dispatched from Fort Wallace after discovering the German family massacre. This development triggered an immediate change in their captors' behavior. The warriors held a brief council to determine their course of action. The decision favored rapid retreat, prioritizing the safety of the band over maintaining custody of all 4 captives. The 2 youngest girls, Julia and Nancy Adelaide, had become particular liabilities to the group's mobility. Nancy Adelaide had fallen from horseback multiple times during hard riding, and both young children's crying risked revealing the band's position to pursuing soldiers. I understood enough of their language by then to know they were arguing about the little ones, Sophia later explained. They kept pointing at Nancy and Julia, shaking their heads. I grabbed Catherine's hand so tight when I realized what they were planning. The Cheyenne made a decision to abandon the 2 youngest sisters on the prairie. This practice, while shocking to contemporary readers, followed pragmatic logic within the context of frontier warfare. Leaving behind captives who hindered mobility represented a common strategy when tribal bands faced military pursuit. 7-year-old Julia and 5-year-old Nancy Adelaide suddenly found themselves alone in the vast prairie landscape, with no provisions, guidance, or protection. Their survival depended entirely on their ability to find food, water, and shelter in an environment both foreign and inherently dangerous. I remember looking back as they rode away with Catherine and me, Sophia recounted. Julia was holding Nancy's hand, both of them standing perfectly still in the tall grass. They looked so small. I thought I would never see them again. That night I cried until I had no tears left. For approximately 2 weeks, the young girls wandered the prairie. They subsisted on whatever edible plants they could identify, wild berries, roots, and even grass when hunger became overwhelming. They sheltered in shallow depressions during rainfall and sought shade during intense midday heat. Their chances of survival without intervention were minimal, yet they demonstrated remarkable resilience. Julia told me years later that she remembered Mother pointing out which berries were safe to eat during our journey. Sophia wrote, that knowledge kept them alive. Each night they would find a place with tall grass and curl up together like small animals. Julia never let go of Nancy's hand. The U.S. military's response to the German family massacre exemplified standard frontier military protocol of the 1870s. Upon discovering the attack site, soldiers from Fort Wallace initiated both a burial detail for the deceased and pursuit operations to recover any captives. Records indicate a detachment of approximately 20 cavalrymen participated in the initial search, following the Cheyenne Trail southwestward. The cavalry pursuit continued for several days, but failed to intercept the main Cheyenne band. However, in an unexpected twist of fate, the same Cheyenne warriors who had abandoned Julia and Nancy Adelaide encountered them again after approximately 2 weeks. Finding the girls still alive, though severely malnourished and dehydrated, the warriors recaptured them. When they brought Julia and Nancy back to camp, I couldn't believe my eyes, Sophia recalled. They were so thin, their clothes in tatters. Nancy's face was sunburned and peeling. Julia had scratches all over her arms and legs, but they were alive. We cried when we held each other again, even though we knew it wasn't really a rescue. The four sisters remained together in the Cheyenne camp through October 1874. During this period, U.S. military operations against hostile bands intensified throughout the southern plains. General Philip Sheridan had authorized a comprehensive winter campaign to force non-compliant tribes onto reservations. This strategy, exploiting Native Americans' winter vulnerability when mobility decreased and food supplies dwindled, put increasing pressure on groups like the one holding the German sisters. By early November, military columns were closing in on several Cheyenne bands. On the morning of November 8th, alarm spread through the camp holding the German sisters. Warriors detected the approach of soldiers, triggering an immediate evacuation. The morning had started like any other, Sophia wrote. Then suddenly, everyone was shouting and running. Men grabbed weapons, women packed essential items. The fear in their movements told us something serious was happening. In the chaos, the warriors made another significant decision regarding their captives. Catherine and Sophia, being older and more capable of enduring hard travel, were ordered onto a single horse. An advance guard escorted them away from the main camp, preparing to outdistance the approaching soldiers. Julia and Nancy Adelaide, still weakened from their earlier abandonment, were left behind. They pulled Catherine and me away so fast, Sophia remembered. I looked back at Julia holding Nancy, both of them crying. A warrior shouted something at us and hit our horse with a whip. I didn't even get to say goodbye. What Sophia couldn't know as she was taken away was that the situation for her younger sisters had become deadly. As the camp evacuated, one warrior made the decision to eliminate the two young captives rather than leave them to be rescued. I understood what they said about my little sisters, Sophia later recalled. One man decided it would be best to kill them rather than let them be found. My heart stopped when I heard this, but we were already being taken away. The warrior returned to where Julia and Nancy Adelaide waited, drew his revolver, and fired at them. In a moment that would later be described as miraculous, the shot missed. Before he could fire again, the situation changed dramatically. A detachment of U.S. cavalry under the command of Lieutenant Frank D. Baldwin appeared on a nearby hill, having tracked the Cheyenne camp. Baldwin, an experienced frontier officer who would later be awarded 2 Congressional Medals of Honor during his military career, directed his men with precision. A military sharpshooter quickly targeted and killed the warrior threatening the German girls, while the rest of the detachment moved to secure the abandoned camp. Lieutenant Baldwin's timely arrival saved Julia and Nancy Adelaide from certain death. This rescue represented one of the few successful recovery operations during the broader conflict with Plains tribes, where captives were rarely retrieved alive. After securing the camp and the 2 German girls, Baldwin gathered critical intelligence about Catherine and Sophia from Julia. He learned not only about their current captivity, but details about the entire German family massacre. This information would prove invaluable in subsequent efforts to recover the remaining sisters. Julia and Nancy Adelaide were transported to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where they received medical attention and care from officers' wives. Their physical condition improved rapidly once they received adequate nutrition and proper clothing. The emotional trauma, however, would require much longer to address. At Fort Leavenworth, the officers' wives were struck by the girls' resilience and composure despite their ordeal. They arranged for a photograph to be taken of Julia and Nancy Adelaide, capturing their image in clean clothes with carefully arranged hair, a stark contrast to their appearance upon rescue. This photograph was sent to Colonel Nelson A. Miles, Lieutenant Baldwin's commanding officer and a key figure in Plains warfare. Miles recognized its potential value immediately. He wrote a message on the back addressed to Mrs. German. These German sisters are well and are now with their friends. Do not be discouraged. Efforts are being made for your benefit. Nelson A. Miles, Colonel and Brevet Major General, U.S. Army. The message revealed both compassion and strategic thinking. Miles understood that Mrs. German was deceased, but the note served multiple purposes. It documented the military's care for the rescued girls, created a historical record, and, most importantly, could serve as proof of life to show the Cheyenne still holding Catherine and Sophia. Colonel Miles believed this photograph might be our salvation, Sophia later wrote. He understood that if our captors saw that our sisters were alive and well treated, it might make a difference in how they treated us or whether they would consider releasing us. Miles implemented a bold strategy. He entrusted the photograph to a Delaware scout, a member of a tribe that maintained peaceful relations with both the U.S. government and various Plains tribes. The scout was instructed to locate the Cheyenne band holding Catherine and Sophia, secretly deliver the photograph to them, and relay a critical message to Chief Stone Calf, the band's leader. The message was both compassionate and strategically threatening. Miles informed Stone Calf that the U.S. government knew about the German sisters and that no mercy would be shown to his tribe unless the remaining captives were delivered alive and unharmed. This diplomatic approach, combining proof of good faith with clear consequences, represented a sophisticated application of frontier negotiation tactics. The photograph was our first real hope, Sophia recalled. Until then, we had no reason to believe anyone even knew we were alive or was looking for us. The idea that our sisters were safe and that someone cared enough to try to reach us changed everything. As Catherine and Sophia were led deeper into Indian Territory in mid-November 1874, they carried no knowledge of their sister's rescue or the diplomatic efforts underway to secure their own release. Their ordeal would continue through the harsh winter months ahead, but the foundations for their eventual rescue had been established through the complementary application of military action and diplomatic initiative. We rode away that November day, believing we might never see civilization again, Sophia wrote decades later. We didn't know that miles behind us, our little sisters were safe, or that a photograph of them would eventually become our ticket to freedom. Sometimes I think about how close we all came to death that day, how different everything might have been if Lieutenant Baldwin had arrived just minutes later. By mid-November, Catherine and Sophia huddled together beneath thin animal hide coverings as the first winter storm hit the camp. They gathered small twigs for fires, scraped snow from the entrances of shelters, and learned to stuff grass into their worn moccasins for insulation. The Cheyenne band moved camp 3 times in December, forcing the sisters to help dismantle and rebuild shelters in freezing conditions. We worked from morning until night, Sophia later wrote, our hands cracked and bled from the cold. We transported bundles, dragged lodge poles through snow, and collected whatever firewood we could find. When we weren't working, we sat with our backs against each other for warmth. Food became their constant preoccupation. The band's hunters returned with increasingly meager results. A few rabbits, occasionally a deer. Catherine and Sophia received the smallest portions, often scraps that others rejected. They dug through snow to find frozen berries and roots, sometimes going 2 or 3 days with nothing but melted snow water. One morning in January, Catherine collapsed while carrying water, Sophia recalled. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. An older woman, not the one who hated us, secretly brought her a piece of jerky no bigger than my thumb. That tiny bit of food might have saved her life. The sisters counted 14 deaths in the camp during January, mostly elderly and very young. They helped dig shallow graves in the frozen ground using broken sticks and stone tools. Catherine developed frostbite on 2 toes, the skin turning black and peeling away. Without treatment, she tore strips from her dress to bind the wounds, limping painfully whenever they moved camp. A warrior confronted them with a gun one evening in early February after receiving news of a nearby military attack. He aimed directly at Sophia, pulled the trigger, but the firing mechanism failed in the cold. I heard the metallic click and stood frozen, Sophia wrote. He tried twice more before another man stopped him. We slept that night, taking turns to watch, certain he would return. The elderly woman who regularly threatened them increased her hostility as food grew scarcer. 3 times she approached their sleeping area with her butchering knife, standing over them while they pretended to sleep. On the 3rd night, February 12th, she pressed the blade against Catherine's neck before another woman intervened, pulling her away amid harsh whispers. Each morning I touched Catherine's face when I woke, afraid she might have died in the night. Sophia noted. We stopped speaking of rescue or home. We spoke only of the day's tasks: find food, stay warm, avoid attention. Their circumstances changed dramatically in early February, when the Delaware messenger sent by Colonel Miles entered the camp. He approached the sisters while they collected water, discreetly passing Sophia a small object wrapped in rawhide. Inside, they found the photograph of Julia and Nancy Adelaide. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it in the snow, Sophia wrote. Catherine grabbed the picture, pressing it against her chest. The messenger whispered that our sisters were safe at Fort Leavenworth, that soldiers knew where we were. He left before anyone noticed our conversation, but those few seconds transformed everything. The photograph circulated among tribal leaders that night during a council meeting that lasted until morning. The sisters heard raised voices but couldn't understand most of the discussion. The next day, treatment of the girls visibly changed. A woman brought them additional blankets, and their food portions increased slightly. Chief Stone Calf summoned them on February 20th. Through a translator, he explained they would return to their people within weeks. The band began breaking camp the following day, traveling south toward the designated Cheyenne Reservation. During this journey, Catherine and Sophia rode in a supply wagon rather than on horseback, the first time they had not been forced to walk or ride behind warriors since their capture. We traveled for 9 days, Sophia recalled. Each night the reservation grew closer. I counted every sunrise, afraid something would happen to prevent our release. On the final morning, we saw American flags in the distance. Catherine gripped my hand so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. On March 1st, 1875, the band arrived at the reservation boundary. Colonel Miles and 25 cavalry soldiers waited there. The sisters were brought forward by 2 Cheyenne women who had occasionally shown them kindness during captivity. No formal ceremony marked the transfer. Catherine and Sophia simply walked across the invisible line separating the 2 groups. Colonel Miles himself helped me onto his horse, Sophia wrote. I remember the weight of his blue uniform coat when he placed it around my shoulders. It smelled of tobacco and wool soap. He said, "You're safe now," but I didn't believe it until we were miles away from the Cheyenne camp. Only then did I allow myself to weep. 2 weeks after their rescue, Catherine and Sophia stood before a row of 30 Cheyenne warriors at Fort Sill. Military officials instructed them to identify those involved in their family's massacre and their captivity. The sisters walked slowly down the line, stopping to point at specific individuals. I recognized 7 men immediately, Sophia wrote. Their faces were burned into my memory. One man looked away when I pointed at him. He had been the one who killed Rebecca. Catherine identified 3 others who had guarded us during the first weeks of captivity. The military arrested these 10 warriors, along with 12 others implicated in separate attacks. They placed the men in chains and loaded them onto wagons bound for the railroad. Their destination, Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida, 1,500 miles from their tribal lands. This forced relocation reflected standard military practice for dealing with hostile Native Americans during this period. The night before the warriors' departure, Chief Mnimik, a Cheyenne leader respected for his wisdom but not involved in the attacks, approached Colonel Miles with an unexpected request. Through an interpreter, he asked Miles to take his 12-year-old son. "Our way of life vanishes," Mnimik told Miles. "My son must learn to live in your world if he is to have a future. Will you teach him as white children are taught?" Miles recorded their conversation in his field journal that night. April 14, 1875. Chief Mnimik's request has occupied my thoughts continuously. If education could replace brutal suppression, might we not solve the Indian problem without further bloodshed? I shall propose a system of Indian education to Washington immediately. Within 3 weeks, Miles drafted a comprehensive educational plan and submitted it to the War Department. Though initially shelved, his proposal caught the attention of Captain Richard Henry Pratt, who implemented many of Miles's ideas when establishing the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania in 1879. This institution became the model for dozens of Indian boarding schools nationwide. Meanwhile, the 4 German sisters needed immediate care. Miles arranged for their transfer to Fort Leavenworth, where Army physicians treated Catherine's frostbitten toes and the girls' various ailments. He personally purchased new clothing for them, proper dresses, shoes, winter coats, and nightgowns. "We had forgotten how it felt to wear real shoes," Sophia recalled. The clothes seemed impossibly clean and soft after months in ragged buckskins. Catherine cried when she saw herself in a mirror for the first time since our capture. On May 2, 1875, Miles petitioned the Kansas courts for legal guardianship of all four sisters, citing their orphan status and his personal commitment to their welfare. The court granted his request, making him their guardian until each reached age 21. That same week, he enrolled them in the post school at Fort Leavenworth. "Colonel Miles visited our classroom every Friday," Sophia noted. "He checked our school books and asked about our progress. He told us education would give us independence that no one could take away." The sisters lived initially in quarters provided for officers' families, then moved to a small house Miles purchased for them near the fort. He hired Mrs. Eleanor Westbrook, a widow whose husband had been killed in the Civil War, to serve as their housekeeper and companion. Miles managed their affairs with remarkable attention to detail despite his military responsibilities. His account books, preserved in the National Archives, show regular entries for the sisters' expenses, school supplies, medical care, clothing allowances, even small luxuries like peppermint candies and hair ribbons. When Miles received orders to Montana Territory in 1876 to fight in the Great Sioux War, he established a trust fund for the sisters and appointed Lieutenant James Calhoun as their local guardian. Miles wrote to them weekly during the campaign, including after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. "Even when fighting Indians in Montana, he remembered our birthdays," Sophia wrote. "A package would arrive with a book or small gift and a letter telling us to study hard. He never treated us as burdens." The sisters gradually adjusted to their new lives, though nightmares and anxiety persisted. School records show Catherine excelled in mathematics, while Sophia showed aptitude for writing and literature. Julia struggled academically, but displayed talent in drawing, while Nancy Adelaide, the youngest, adapted most completely to her new circumstances. By 1880, the sisters began establishing independent lives. Catherine, then 23, married Army Lieutenant William Harrison and moved to Colorado. Julia later joined them in the West, eventually settling in Escudero, California, after her own marriage in 1886. Nancy Adelaide and Sophia remained closer to their Kansas roots, both marrying local farmers and establishing homes near Fall City. "We promised never to lose touch with each other," Sophia explained in an 1892 letter. "Every Sunday I sit at my table and write 3 letters, one to Catherine, one to Julia, and one to Nancy. No matter how busy life becomes, we maintain this connection." Miles's relationship with the sisters continued long after his formal guardianship ended. When he became commanding general of the United States Army in 1895, he invited all 4 sisters and their families to Washington for his installation ceremony. They sat in places of honor, introduced by Miles as "my daughters in all but name." The German sisters' story entered public consciousness through newspaper accounts, military reports, and eventually more formal historical documentation. In 1925, Anissa Varis Grace Meredith, a historian from Laverne, California, compiled their experiences into an illustrated book, interviewing Sophia and Catherine extensively. "Much of what happened I have forgotten now," Sophia told Meredith during their final interview. "The mind protects itself by blurring certain memories. But some images remain crystal clear, looking back over my shoulder to where my family lay scattered upon the prairie. The cold weight of fear that never left my stomach during those 6 months, and Colonel Miles's kind eyes when he wrapped his coat around my shoulders the day we were rescued." Sophia lived the longest of the sisters, dying in 1934 at age 72. In her final years, she spoke occasionally to historical societies about frontier experiences, though she refused sensationalistic interview requests. Her last public statement about her captivity came in response to a journalist who asked if she hated the Cheyenne for what they had done. "Hate only destroys the person who carries it," she replied. "I learned there are good and bad people in every race. I saw Cheyenne women risk punishment to bring us food. I saw others who would have killed us without hesitation. My family died in a war neither side fully understood. What matters is that 4 frightened girls survived to build lives filled with more joy than sorrow. That is victory enough. The German sisters' ordeal permanently altered federal Indian policy through its influence on Colonel Miles and subsequently the Indian education system. Their personal resilience in rebuilding lives shattered by violence offers a remarkable testament to human endurance. From the horror of witnessing their family's massacre to establishing homes and families of their own, their journey illuminates both the devastating impact of frontier conflict and the capacity of the human spirit to forge new beginnings from unimaginable tragedy.